You know what's genuinely strange? Everyone around us constantly talks about how important it is to socialize, to have as many friends as possible, to always be somewhere. Like your social life is some kind of performance review. If you're not posting daily, not showing up to every event, not constantly surrounded by people, something must be wrong with you. But there's a whole category of people who hear all of that and quietly say, no thanks, I'm good. And it's not because they're depressed. It's not because they're afraid of people. It's because they've discovered something most of us spend our entire lives actively avoiding themselves. If you'd rather spend Friday night at home with a book than in some loud, crowded venue. If the phrase, let's hang out, immediately fills you with a strange, low level dread. If you've ever canceled plans and felt not guilt, but pure, clean relief, this is for you, because what I'm about to tell you will completely change the way you see yourself. And you'll realize that society has fundamentally misunderstood solitude for a very long time. For decades, psychology treated people who genuinely love being alone as though something was missing in them. The logic was simple. Humans are social creatures, so if someone consistently chooses solitude, something must have gone wrong. Maybe they're shy, maybe anxious, maybe a difficult childhood, maybe they're just waiting for someone to come along and fix them. But in 2016, researchers at the University of Buffalo published a study in the journal Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin that asked a question no one had asked quite right before. What if some people simply enjoy being alone? Not because of trauma, not because of fear, but because they genuinely prefer it? They gave it a name, unsociability. And critically, they separated it from two things people constantly confuse it with. First, introversion, which is about restoring energy in solitude. Second, social anxiety, which is about fear and avoidance. Unsociability is something different entirely. It's a quiet, stable preference for one's own company, with no distress attached to it whatsoever. When they studied these people, they found something unexpected. People who love solitude weren't broken. They weren't waiting to be saved. They scored high on measures of self-sufficiency, showed lower levels of aggression, and reported genuine well-being, not despite their preference for solitude, but in many ways because of it. Let me explain what happens neurologically when you genuinely love being alone. Your dopamine system, the brain's reward circuitry, operates differently than it does in people who crave constant social stimulation. When an extrovert walks into a party, their brain essentially throws a dopamine celebration. The noise, the movement, the conversations happening everywhere at once, all of that registers as reward. Their threshold for stimulation is high, so they need a lot of input to feel satisfied. Your brain reaches its stimulation threshold much faster. You don't need the whole production to feel fulfilled. One meaningful conversation, a long walk by yourself, an afternoon of uninterrupted thinking. That's your version of a concert. And the key word there is your, not inferior, not broken. Just calibrated differently. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Neuroimaging research has consistently shown that periods of quiet solitude activate the default mode network, a set of brain regions involved in self-reflection, creative thinking, consolidating memories, and imagining the future. This network doesn't switch on when you're busy reacting to the external world. It switches on when the external world quiets down. In other words, when you're alone and your mind is wandering, your brain isn't idling. It's doing some of its most sophisticated work. This isn't a new discovery either. Some of history's sharpest minds operated on exactly this principle. Isaac Newton developed the foundations of calculus and his theory of gravity during a period of enforced isolation when Cambridge closed due to plague. He called it his annus mirabilis, his miraculous year. Einstein described his best thinking as happening in a kind of interior silence. Maya Angelou famously rented a plain hotel room every morning just to write, not because she lacked space at home, but because she understood that certain kinds of thinking only happen when you remove yourself from the noise of ordinary life. These weren't antisocial people, they were people who understood something precise, that there are things the mind can only do when no one is interrupting it. Now here's something that will probably surprise you. Research by Dr. Bella DePaulo, a social psychologist who has spent decades studying people who live alone and embrace solitude, points to a counterintuitive pattern. People who are genuinely comfortable in their own company often maintain stronger, more honest connections with the people they do choose to spend time with. Why? Because they're not desperate. They're not trying to extract everything they need, validation, entertainment, emotional regulation, from whoever happens to be nearby. They don't cling, they don't perform. When they show up because they actually want to be there, not because the alternative is sitting alone with a discomfort they can't tolerate. Think about what that means for the quality of a friendship. The difference between someone who's with you because they need company and someone who's with you because they genuinely chose you out of a full life. There's also a simpler version of this. When you've had real time alone, time to rest, to think, to come back to yourself, you treat people better. You're not depleted. You're not quietly resentful of the energy you're spending. You're not asking other people to fix something in you without even realizing it. You arrive as a complete person because you did the work of being with yourself first. Western culture has a deeply uncomfortable relationship with being alone. Eating alone at a restaurant still carries a vague social stigma. Staying home on a weekend is something people feel they have to justify. Solitude gets treated as a problem to be solved rather than a state to be respected. But other cultures have understood this differently for a long time. In Japan, the concept of hitori, time spent intentionally alone, is woven into everyday life without apology. There are restaurants designed specifically for solo diners, with private booths and individual service. Single-seat sections in movie theaters, karaoke rooms built for one. These aren't accommodations for the unfortunate. They're infrastructure for a cultural understanding that sometimes being with yourself is exactly what you need. It's worth being honest here, though. Japan also has a phenomenon called hikikomori, a severe form of social withdrawal where people isolate completely for months or years. The existence of that on one end of the spectrum is a useful reminder that solitude exists on a continuum. Intentional, chosen solitude that renews you is genuinely different from isolation that traps you. The distinction matters, and we'll come back to it. Let's be real about something because most videos on this topic won't be. There is a version of loving solitude that is healthy, self-aware, and genuinely enriching. And there is a version that is a very comfortable, very convincing form of hiding. The honest question to ask yourself isn't, do I love being alone? Almost everyone, at some level, does. The question is, why? If your solitude is a place you go to recharge, to think, to create, to come back to yourself so you can show up better, that's the version worth protecting and building on. But if your solitude is primarily a place where nothing can hurt you, where you never have to be vulnerable, where the discomfort of genuine human connection never reaches you, that's not self-sufficiency. That's a defense mechanism dressed up as a personality trait. And the reason that matters is this. Some of the most important kinds of personal growth only happen in the friction of real relationships. Being misunderstood and having to explain yourself. Caring about someone enough to stay in a hard conversation. Letting someone see you when you're not composed. None of that happens alone. If you use solitude to permanently opt out of that discomfort, you don't get to avoid the growth tax. You just pay it in a different way, later, in ways that are harder to trace. The healthiest relationship with solitude is one where it serves you, not one where it shields you. You go there to recharge, to think, to create, and then you return because you have something to give. You're not escaping from life, you're preparing for it. Here are 3 honest questions worth sitting with. First, can I connect with people when I want to? Not just in theory, but in practice. Do I actually reach out sometimes? Do I let people in, even when it's uncomfortable? Second, do I have at least a small number of people I genuinely trust? Not followers, not acquaintances, people who know something real about me and who I actually let matter. Third, when I choose solitude, is it a choice I'm making from a position of fullness? Or am I avoiding something I don't want to face? If you can answer those honestly, and the answers are yes, yes, and fullness, then you're not broken. You're not behind. You haven't failed at being human. You've simply figured out something that most people spend years chasing in the wrong direction. That the most foundational relationship in your life is the one you have with yourself. And unlike every other relationship, that one doesn't require scheduling, compromise, or anyone else's availability. It's always there, It's always honest. And when it's built on genuine self-knowledge rather than fear, it makes every other connection in your life stronger. What to say next time someone asks. Next time someone looks at you sideways for staying home, for canceling plans, for preferring a quiet evening to a crowded room, you don't owe them an explanation. But if you want to give one, you could talk about dopamine sensitivity and stimulation thresholds. You could mention the default mode network and what the brain actually does in silence. You could reference the research showing that people who are comfortable alone often have deeper, more deliberate relationships than people who can't stand to be by themselves for an hour. Or you could just smile and say, I really enjoy my own company. That usually ends the conversation pretty quickly. And honestly, that's fine. Because people who have genuinely learned to be alone, not as a retreat, but as a practice, have found something that most people are desperately searching for in every room they walk into. Not the absence of noise, the presence of themselves. If this resonated with you, explore more on the channel. And ask yourself honestly, which kind of solitude is yours?